had a few really good art teachers when I was very small, like 8 years old until I was about 17. I was pretty well surrounded, and I think it came from them. But basically, I'm using the student grade watercolor just for fun. But essentially, what you can get away with, I'm going to try to arrange this in a way that makes sense. What you can get away with are these colors right here on a limited palette. You can do pretty much anything with this. However, I would say that having a good crimson color, whether it be alizarin crimson or quinacridone magenta or something, is really handy also for flesh tones, because the cadmium red, this is the pale one, it's really orange. Medium you can get away with too, but because this is so orange, it's almost complementary to your ultramarine, which makes it difficult to make purples. So that's why I think having a good alizarin or some sort of crimson is sort of essential. So essentially, like, if I want to, let's just start with something really basic. Oh, other colors that I usually sometimes add, a cerulean blue, or also a cobalt teal, something that is a nice bright sort of greenish blue. And then if you want to add greens, you could go for a Viridian, which comes on this palette. However, as you'll see, it's really blue. Another green that I've really fallen in love with that I've added is sap green, and it's actually really different. And this is like, I never use this brands, but probably in like a more expensive brand, it's actually much deeper. In my acrylics, it's a really dark green. It really looks like a sap tree, like the needles. And it's transparent, which makes it awesome. And usually if I can't get a nice black by mixing my burnt umber, so normally to make a black, you take burnt umber and ultramarine blue. Let's see, I'll just mix some of this up. And you will get, this is why I never use black. So the quality of your paints, this is where sometimes you can run into problems. But I can get this really nice dark color that is pretty much a very neutral gray with burnt umber and ultramarine blue. It depends on the quality of your paint, because sometimes I've found mostly the burnt umber isn't pigmented enough to contrast with the ultramarine. This one seems okay. I would just have to layer this up. So that's how I would get a black. If ever I needed it to be even darker than this, you could sort of add in some of the complementary colors. So I could add in some of this, that's going to be way too much, but I could add in some of the reds, and even a little bit, let's say this Viridian green, and just kind of like mash all this up. And so something that I really like doing, this is not the good balance, but here we go. So it'll get a little bit darker. It might change the color a little bit, but no, it's pretty good. One thing that's nice about mixing in a limited palette like this is that I can then decide, okay, I want something that's dark but then fades into a blue, and then possibly, I'm rushing a bit, so I'm mixing a little bit badly, but then also possibly then mixes and goes into like a purple. So then I can take these colors here, for example, so my alizarin crimson, my ultramarine blue, and my burnt umber, and I get these really dark, these really nice dark colors here that have enough difference that if I start laying them out together, I get really subtle shifts in hues, and I'll let that dry and you'll see it, but it goes from like really nice sort of warm reds into cooler tones, and then if I wanted to cool that off even more, that's where I can take, if I've got my cerulean blue on my palette, I can then add some of that on this side mixed with these tones, and then end up with something in similar color tones and similar palette, but now I can get really nice hue shifts. And this is why I really like actually working with a limited palette, more than with like thousands of colors, because in the end, at the end of a painting, at the end of the day, your painting is going to look a lot more harmonious, and you can come up with these really nice subtle shifts in color that look quite natural. So flesh tones, let's say, my brushes are going to get dirty, I mean it's really quick, but bear with me. Flesh tones I found in watercolor are actually not that complicated to get. I will take my Naples yellow, not my Naples, sorry, yellow ochre and alizarin crimson, and I can get a fairly nice, that's too much, you have to kind of get the balance right, of red and yellow. Like if I'm doing a pale skin tone, this actually, with a lot of water, actually works really fairly well as a sort of pale flesh tone. And then obviously if you need to go darker, you can just add some of your burnt umber or also a little bit of burnt sienna. So burnt sienna is actually an orange. It's like a brown orange. I actually consider it an orange because it's quite intense. And then like if I want to do sort of a warmer version of that same skin tone, I can mix up the same with the alizarin crimson and the yellow ochre, and then I can just add a little bit of my cadmium, and I'll start getting warmer flesh tones in here. And then if I want to go a little bit to the little bit more orange, I can do that with the burnt sienna. I'm going really light right now, but you can see how you can get these nice fades of color by doing this. And then if you want to create shadow tones in there, let's say I've got some of my colors mixed up here. You can start dropping in, you can actually either use, I'm just going to pull some of this over, a little bit of the burnt, or a little bit of the ultramarine, and this will mute it because it starts to be a bit of a complementary. If it goes a little bit green like this, which maybe you don't want, you can add just a little bit more of your alizarin crimson into the balance, because this will make it slightly more purple. So you can get into your purple tones by mixing the alizarin and the burnt, or the ultramarine. Or you can also go even into the cerulean blue and going even more green. So then we have a nice fade that goes sort of from really cool flesh tone through to the warmer flesh tones, just by using those colors. Obviously, to make a green, we have two options right now. If we keep the cerulean blue, we've got the ultramarine blue. Actually, we've got more options than that. This palette is actually really very flexible. That's what I like about it. So I can go with the cadmium yellow, and I can get this type of green here. Or if I take the cadmium yellow and I take my cerulean blue, I get a much more vibrant green. And of course it's just a matter of balancing then the amount. Like I can add more yellow into this mix as opposed to blue, or then I can decide that it needs to go more blue, so I just add more of either. That's pretty much ultramarine out of the tube, but let's add some more yellow in there. So we can get all of these incredible green colors just using those three colors at the moment, and you get a nice sort of wide range. And then you can do the same exercise with the yellow ochre. I'm just going to pull it over here. I tend to group my colors in families, so I keep my reds together, my yellows, and then sometimes I put my ultramarine with my burnt umber, just because I usually make black. but it's good to group them. So yeah, I'm taking the yellow ochre. Now let's try it with the ultramarine. See, these are closer in terms of complementary, so I'm going to get much more earthy, muted tones with this, but it's still in the green family. And again, it's just a matter of how you balance how much yellow and blue you have in there. But this is creating a really nice earth palette at the moment for like outdoors stuff, like greenery and trees and grass and things. I'll do the same exercise but with the cerulean blue and my yellow ochre. So there we have another combination. So those are like sort of really quickly done, the range of greens that you can get just with those colors. Purples can be tricky on this palette, I will admit. That's why I like to keep, I'm looking for a clean brush, that's why I like to keep an alizarin crimson on here. Because if I try to mix the ultramarine blue and the cad red, I will most definitely get a purple that's fairly muted, because these are almost complementary colors. So I get a really muted purple. However, if I take my ultramarine blue and I take my alizarin crimson, I can start getting much more interesting purple colors out of this. And then actually something that's fun is when it comes to creating highlights on something, instead of adding white, which you would sort of think of doing, you can actually go in and add just way more red. So I'm just gonna like bleed this through now to a more red. And then you can actually take, now that it's already gone to the red side, I can actually take some of this cadmium, which is getting a bit dirty unfortunately, just a sec. I'm doing this a bit too quickly. But because it's already more to the red, this orange is going to be a little bit less of complementary. So I can actually start creating highlights that go through a red that has a higher chroma value. So then I can go almost from like a shadow purple to a highlight purple or red, and I end up getting a sort of gaining in brightness and chroma by doing it this way. And you can do that, obviously. It sort of happened here too, where I went from like sort of this bluey green color in toward the cadmium yellow. What other colors? So like browns obviously are in these tones, and then you would just add, let's say, more burnt umber, maybe some burnt sienna. And then if you want to create the shadow colors, you can start adding in some ultramarine blue. This could be good for like trees. Oops, that's way too much blue. And then even from there, you could add in a little bit of your alizarin crimson. And then it kind of warms up some of those shadows. So now you can create like really nice warm, cool shadows in colors that would work really well for like trees. This palette in general, as you can probably see, gives you a fairly earthy palette. So something that I see a lot of times with beginner paintings is that the colors are a little bit too saturated to be believable, and actually like mixing this way will help you avoid that pitfall. The other really handy thing about this is all of the colors on my palette are now going to work, so I can literally come in here and just start. I don't even need to worry about my palette getting all that dirty, because I've kept everything in the proper families, and I can easily come in here and just make really nice, even vibrant colors, just by mixing straight. Well, that's straight out of the tube, so that doesn't count, but just by mixing what's on my palette. And to be honest, this is what my palettes look like usually, and I cleaned it for this. Normally I just let it go and I just keep mixing on top. And as long as you keep things organized in families, you don't really get muddy colors. You'll have sort of muted colors because we're not using anything directly out of the tube on these, but they're going to be consistent, and throughout a painting you're going to have actually something that looks really consistent. For skies, obviously you can do like, I'm getting a little bit muddy here because I'm going a bit fast, but you can do sort of your bluer, or like cerulean blue as a wash here. And then you can wash into an ultramarine blue, and you'll get a nice gradient happening here between your sort of like cooler color on the horizon maybe, and then your darker blue as it comes up overhead. So that's pretty much it. That's like honestly all the colors that you need. I didn't even touch my vermilion green actually, and I'll just show you, or no, the sap green, not the vermilion. So the sap green, as you can see, is basically this color from this palette anyways. It's a bit different probably with different brands. I think this is probably one of the colors that changes a lot. But it's not so far from, if we take, let's say, the cerulean blue and a whole bunch of this, a whole bunch of that cad yellow. I can actually, well, it's almost essentially the same color. It's slightly toward the yellow right now, but I maybe will just add a little bit more blue in there. So as you see, I didn't actually even need that sap green. I basically just mixed it straight from cadmium yellow and cerulean blue. So that's it in a nutshell. I hope you got something out of this. I'm really a firm believer of mixing colors. I feel like it will just open so many doors in the long term, and you'll have paintings that just look a whole lot more harmonious, because everything is in the same palette, family of colors. Thanks. Have a good day.